Chapter 4: Reculturing Curriculum. To restructure is not to reculture. Changing formal structures is not the same as changing norms, habits, skills, and beliefs. Michael Fullen, 1993. In a time of broad cultural and political acceptance of the utilitarian goals of education, curriculum transformation cannot come about from superficial or piecemeal changes. On the contrary, it will take shared visions, coherent practices, and commitment to profoundly change the cultures of classrooms and schools. Challenges to the dominant standardized management paradigm need to be initiated by educators, families, communities who understand what's at stake, both educationally and politically, and are ready to engage in serious discourse about revisioning curriculum. In addition to the participation in platforms for inquiry, dialogue, and reflection, educators have to be willing to create and enact transformative curriculum in classrooms and schools and work for institutional infrastructures of appropriate resources and support. Reculturing. To change the prevailing culture of schooling to reculture curriculum, educators must recognize, challenge, and then profoundly change commonly held assumptions, values, norms, and practices. Reculturing demands more than just a partial modification. Changing school structures, adopting incremental standards, or trying new instructional methods cannot by themselves significantly alter core assumptions about learning and teaching or beliefs about the ultimate aims of schooling. For instance, when a district adopts new textbooks, schools create flexible scheduling, and teachers introduce group work or allow students limited choices of learning activities. These occurrences may change traditional routines, leading to substantially different experiences for students, but these events may not bring about significant curriculum transformation. Instead, these efforts may just be bricolage or tinkering, in which new practices do not disrupt the cultural norms. To make specific changes in structures of the classroom and schools, even when they enhance learning, it is not the same as reculturing curriculum. The differences between restructuring and reculturing schools are illuminated through the concepts of first and second order change. First order change, often instituted with top-down measures, exists when the norms of the system remain the same. In school reform, first order changes improve the efficiency and effectiveness of what is being done already, without disturbing the basic organizational features, without substantially altering the way that children and adults perform their roles. In second order change, that typically begins when a number of stakeholders feel dissatisfaction with present arrangements, norms are changed and challenged. Further, second-order change transforms the fundamental properties of the system. In school reform, second-order changes alter the fundamental ways in which organizations are put together, including new goals, structures, and roles. This comes about as stakeholders collectively shape those ideas into a set of community beliefs. In this way, reculturing as a second-order change transforms fundamental beliefs about all aspects of curriculum and pedagogy by profoundly altering persistent regularities of school practice. Fullen, a leading analyst of educational change, claims the best-intentioned, well-resourced, and highly concentrated efforts cannot succeed in bringing about meaningful change without transforming the culture of schooling. It is the culture of schooling that casts light on the distinctive nature of the practices. He reminds us to restructure is not to reculture. Changing formal structures is not the same as changing norms, habits, skills, and beliefs. Prerequisites for reculturing. Cycles of school reform have called into question traditional curricula, even though these movements seldom have transformed dominant practices. More publicized reform movements, such as A Nation at Risk or No Child Left Behind, have not provided models of curriculum transformation, as have grassroots efforts to create inspirational, humane, and progressive classrooms and schools. We learn far less about reculturing from top down, one view reforms than from local experiences of visioning, experimentation, and reflection that reveal reculturing as a complex process involving interrelated elements of reflection, vision, communication, learning communities, system thinking, and shared leadership. Historical and contemporary research documents that recultured schools come about through the efforts of people who share similar goals and values and clearly articulate their visions. This process often begins through recognition of common problems and awareness of the need for change. A catalyst is needed to start and sustain school culture change. For a significant change, sometimes referred to as a second-order change, to occur, fundamental questions would be asked regularly about the practices and structures of schools and the beliefs and theories of teachers about these enactments. Then occurs the cycle of scrutiny and reflection to assess not only the outcomes, but the worth of chosen goals in the light of new knowledge, research, or changing social conditions. Such reflection may begin in small groups, as well as more public forums with questioners and dialogue facilitators. Reflection and deliberation are crucial because those who desire change must understand the significance of their actions. Therefore, they need to reflect on and understand the broader human and social purposes of what they do and to make decisions about what and how they teach in the light of their commitments to attain those purposes. Research on reculturing also emphasizes the power of shared visions or beliefs held by teachers, parents, and community members. A vision cannot be given, transposed, or imposed upon a school, but must be built over time through an ongoing process of conversation, studies, and reflection. Schools that sustain reculturing renew their teacher cultures so that their visions stay fresh, compelling, and continue to be shared. To hold on to their visions, it behooves recultured schools to reunite and hire new teachers and administrators who share their philosophies. And when new hires join vision-centered schools, existing staff need to share their goals, practices, and institutional memory. Because of the importance of sharing beliefs and information within schools and with the community, communication is an important element in reculturing. Educators involved in the successful reculturing work know the importance of networking within the school and the larger educational community, and often use technology to provide information about meetings and developments and to engage in discussions. But communities can also be quite low-tech with small face-to-face meetings such as lunch roundtables in which people can share ideas and mobilize for action. Conversations should take place not only within school, but with the public, particularly about the relationship to schools' efforts and the broader reform vision. Teachers and others are more likely to change existing school regularities when they are encouraged to be mindful, to make explicit the meanings that are the basis for their enactment of particular events and actions in schools and classrooms. Both understanding one's meanings and make it public are critical to the significant change. Thoughtful action and efficacy and motivation to act in an environment as complex as a school. Teachers and administrators together should be prepared to go on record with the school community about why the beliefs and practices associated with the progressive curriculum reforms are congruent with the community's vision of education. They also need to explain their vision with a well-founded and coherent rationale that links their understanding of the classroom learning to the larger goals of education, especially when it is contrary to historical and cultural norms. Another commonality in examples of curricular reforms is that the stakeholder believes that the school is the center of change. As such, they are comfortable with the idea that a school can become a place of experimentation and even uncertainty. Schools that reculture develop collaborative learning communities focus on professional development, teaching, learning, and assessment of progress. Such communities develop their capacity to be creative, solve problems, make decisions, and are able to sustain their reform. Interactions within a professional learning communities are characterized by mutual respect, a sense of fairness, and democratic decision-making, and are models for the schools themselves that sustain a visionary curriculum and are caring communities. Furthermore, schools support learning communities by providing adequate resources and time for collaboration. Moreover, the participants in reculturing resist an either or mentality or believing in hasty fixes, such as published curriculum packages, and instead engage in system thinking. With this system thinking, their members would be able to see the big picture of their organization and understand how parts and whole are interrelated and how actions in one domain create consequences in another. They would see the connections between people's personal and interpersonal learning and how the organization learned collectively as a key as the key to change and success. By understanding a systems approach, participants consider the culture of the school and of the teachers and appreciate complexity and ambiguity. With a systems view, they are likely to have a long view, patience, and persistence because they know that change is long and complicated process. Shared leadership, a principle of systems thinking, is also an important feature within the recultured schools. In the fullest sense, shared leadership includes participation by parents, community members, and students. In that way, decision making is moved as close as possible to the people responsible for the implementation. Principals or heads of schools must foster shared decision making and recognize the importance of teachers' autonomy and their critical leadership role in reculturing. Notwithstanding, administrators are called upon to have a variety of leadership roles, especially as facilitators for and negotiators of shared visions and stewards of these visions. Strong leadership is necessary to maintain a school's philosophy and to forge alliances within and outside their school to help institute change or resist external demands. Further, administrators need to be involved with the planning, leadership succession to ensure the school's vision stays alive. Research obstacles to reculturing. Research on school reform points to numerous obstacles that must be overcome to make profound changes to schooling. These hurdles include endorsement of ad hoc curriculum planning, entrenched norms of schooling antagonistic to reculturing, traditional organization of curriculum, and school structures that work against creation of learning communities, and difficulties in sustaining curricular transformation. First, a commonly enacted assumption about schooling that the curriculum need not be based on an overarching vision, but can be modified haphazardly in response to a multitude of presumed needs of the community and society. Various other propositions, such as creating benchmark or curricular alignment, also shape discussions about school reform. But these initiatives do not communicate clear visions, lead teachers toward their own understanding of congruent practices and aims, or invite critique. Such mandates often create compliance pressure on teachers who feel dominated from above. As such, the teacher's natural response will be to avoid taking initiative and to concentrate on ways to protect themselves in the fact of a bureaucratic scrutiny. As well, participants in existing school cultures may be fixated on short-term goals, such as getting through a unit of instruction, preventing disarray in the classroom, perhaps even getting more kids involved in learning. But these are not premised on deeper ideals. Even when schools' mission statements appear to be visionary, these ideals may in fact mask real practices that respond primarily to the immediate necessities or driven by a body of incentives and disincentives. It is cruel irony when schools, in single-minded pursuit of higher test scores, proclaim a mission to prepare students to become citizens and lifelong learners, but neither provide education for civic engagement nor curriculum based upon learners' curiosity. Current critics describe contemporary traditional schooling as regimes of accountability, a standardized and packaged curriculum, and a lockstep pedagogy that are combined with a focus of privatization and regulations that hold teachers and administrators' feet to a fire of competition. Entrenched patterns of schooling also can be barriers. Research on schooling in recent past suggests that school culture's most formative beliefs remain unstated, and curriculum is influenced by folk pedagogies that are composed of incoherent, deeply embedded beliefs about what is normal. Therefore, belief systems in most schools are difficult to articulate, interrogate, and change, and it is difficult to take the first steps towards reculturing because educational practices are rarely subject to critical internal and public reflection beyond those related to efficiency in maintaining the status quo. As well as new teachers and as well when new teachers enter the profession, they deal with the most unmanageable array of responsibilities and thus tend to rely on a combination of available past images and specific survival techniques to guide their thinking. Cuban describes this initiation, the complicated practices of establishing routines that will induce a group of students to behave in an orderly way while learning subject matter that the teacher is still unfamiliar with. The teacher is driven to use practices that he or she remembers seeing used or that veterans advise using. By taking such advice, errants absorb through the subtle osmosis the school's norms and expectations about what it takes to survive as a teacher. The, for, the folklore, occupational gimmicks, norms, and daily teaching reinforce existing approaches rather than nourish skepticism. Furthermore, even experienced teachers may depend upon their memory of their own days as students, putting into action the conservative, familiar images of what is proper, possible, and efficient in a classroom setting. Obstacles to innovation are also found in the norms surrounding the traditional organization of the curriculum. Walled classrooms, set class periods, and discrete academic departments persist because they seem normal, part of the folk pedagogy of education, or because they are convenient. The basic grammar of schooling, like the shape of the classroom, has remained remarkably stable over the decades. By the grammar of schooling, we mean the regular structures and rules that organize the work of institution. Here we have in mind, for example, standardized organizational practices in dividing time and space, classifying students and allocating them to classrooms, and splintering knowledge into subjects. For example, the deeply ingrained norms that schools should be orderly and predictable, and the ambiguity and uncertainty are rarely welcome, discourages reculturing. The idea of schools as the environments of experimentation, as Dewey and others envisioned when they created laboratory schools, goes against the grain of traditional schooling. The prevailing culture of schools also perpetrates itself is through the tendency of conventional educators as well as the public to disdain of any kind of curriculum work not part of the status quo. That seems abnormal. Even when teachers work together to try innovative curriculum, they may be viewed with suspicion from other colleagues. Moreover, caricatures abound when other alternatives are mentioned, no doubt reinforced by popular culture. Curriculum calling attention to the power relationship branded as radical and dangerous. Child-centered learning as non-academic, sentimental or indulgent. Alternative schools are Alternative schools as undisciplined and out of control, and a vigorous liberal education as elitist. Such caricatures are overly simplistic and certainly not useful to the curricular discourse leading to imagining alternatives. A further way to view the ingrained pattern is to again consider the influence of business that permeates the culture of schooling as an aesthetic preference for efficient production, which is manifested in schedules, refined tasks, and interchangeable designs, with students are used to going from class to class, which may be unrelated to content method. The segregation of subjects has made genuine curriculum integration rare. Likewise, beliefs about nature of subject matter or learners discourage curriculum transformation. Examples of curriculum norms include the idea that young children cannot investigate social injustice or that human rights education has no place in mathematics classes. Other assumptions is that the study of occupations belongs only within vocational classes rather than integrated across the curriculum. Research on school reform also suggests that challenges to reculturing emanate from persistent institutional conditions that thwart efforts for innovation and limit the possibility for real change. Above all, schools have a cultural regularity that inhibits teachers' interactions with peers and other professionals, thus limiting reflection about teaching practices and exposure to new ideas. Once more, when working alone, teachers get used to a certain pattern of learning, teaching, assimilation, changing, or retaining the status quo. Research on school reform also suggests that changes to reculturing emanate from persistent institutional conditions that thwart efforts for innovation and limit the possibility for real change. Already read that. Schools are typically characterized by norms of primacy and isolation. Teachers participate alone in the structures, activities, events, materials of classroom enactments, and infrequently discuss amongst themselves what they do in their classroom. The privacy norm and the structural isolation of teachers prevents the kind of social interaction that can serve as a catalyst for cultural change. The privacy norm and the structural isolation of teachers prevent the kind of social interaction that can serve as a catalyst for cultural change. especially in times of financial hardship. Resources and time for planning may be especially scarce. In prevailing cultures of schooling, teachers have little time and support for taking their first important steps for reculturing, deliberation, and reflection. Political forces outside and within schools also thwart teachers' involvement into curricular transformation. Historically, policymakers have sought to control curriculum and standardize teaching rather than to educate teachers to be sophisticated curriculum planners. Granting teachers the authority to create curriculum is often greeted with resistance from political conservatives who fear not only the teacher's autonomy in choosing content, but also children's learning of critical thinking skills. Such conservatives view teachers as technicians, called upon to implement classroom objectives that are tightly controlled and defined by others higher up on administrative chain of command. Moreover, top-down imposition of curriculum impedes curriculum reform because it excludes teachers and the community from the change process and is an antithesis to the prerequisites for reculturing. Successful and sustainable school change, Fullen suggests, requires coherence, integration, diversity, continuous skills development, the creation of collaborative work cultures, multiple foci of change within multi-directional communication flows across the school and community, and a broadening of leadership net to include as many teachers, parents, and students as possible. The role of external change agents is not to represent one more project, but to interrelate with the total reform agenda of school. Researchers also have noted the tendency for large-scale reform to displace locally initiated innovation, with the standardized testing movement being particularly deadly to reculturing schools. Especially sobering to those of us who hope for the curricular transformation is the challenge sustaining it. Historian David Tyack writes, the notion that reforms in instruction should or can be permitted ignores historical experience. No magic wand of reculturing can set things permanently straight, but we will always have waves of education reform that seek to alter the substantial recultures we have built. For values differ, interests conflict, generalization, generational perspectives change. For the last century, Americans have consistently tinkered up toward utopia in school reform. It has been our way of creating the future that we want. This weak record of sustainability of innovative schools over time, a well-documented tendency to fade over the initial golden age and to rejoin the mainstream and soon look like any other school or vanish altogether, stems from a variety of reasons that cast light on the complexity of reculturing and the frailty of human efforts. Curriculum transformation often begins with a catalyst, one or more inspirational leaders who facilitate the inquiry, deliberation, and reflection needed for reculturing. Yet when such leaders are charismatic, people may seem to support them, but may not really be on board with the committed to the vision of change. It can also be the case that leaders may not adequately bring to the community to support the vision and or become embroiled in community controversies and strife, especially when fundamental reforms violated the public's notions of a real school. Innovators have failed to get genuine acceptance of visions from their colleagues in schools, or afterwards, did not take the time to orient new teachers into the school's values, to attempt to transfer the culture of the school, and to reestablish the commitment to each other as a community with shared values. In short, sometimes innovators' lack of political savvy and knowledge of systematic change, and perhaps despite their utmost efforts, innovators may not be able to overcome the enormity of the political issues involved in reculturing. For example, lack of support and even animosity from colleagues who did not share the vision or who resented innovation for fear of displacement of existing resources. But even when reculturing truly engages stakeholders and the curriculum transform takes place, the issue of leadership still can be problematic. When strong leaders move on, reculturing work can dwindle or collapse, unless tremendous care has been expended to find successors with strong leadership skills and commitment to the vision agreed upon by the school and community. The final obstacle to sustaining transformation relates to the sheer effort it requires from participants. Above and beyond the work of teaching, educators who become immersed in reculturing must take the time for deliberation and conversations, become educated in best practices to support visions, shared ideas with colleagues and the community, network with other educators and organizations, and continually reflect on aims and practices. Knowledge of the process of reculturing means working against becoming insulated from alternative ideas by fostering self-inquiry and professional knowledge. And too often, all these activities must be undertaken within the context generally unsupportive of curricular transformation and teacher leadership. Therefore, one crucial factor has been turnover and burnout, as altering basic organizational patterns created considerably cognitive and emotional strain. Nevertheless, as it is idealistic to expect reculturing to be easy and everlasting process, or naive to underestimate the power of the status quo order to maintain itself, it also is unrealistic to believe the curriculum transformation is impossible. Research on school reform suggests that innovative schools seem to possess a predictable evolutionary lifespan of creativity and experimentation, overreaching and entropy, and survival and continuity. That's why it's necessary for reformers to have a patience, persistence, and a long view, and reject the notion of quick fixes. Reculturing is not doomed to fail, especially when former habits change, new norms take hold, and new identities are formed. Let's see how much more we have left. Let's see. We're in chapter 4. So we've gone into reculturing. We're doing curriculum leadership and reculturing. Looks like curricular cultures and something else. We'll see. Let's hide that bad boy again. Curriculum leadership and reculturing. To bring about curricular transformation, educators must become curriculum leaders. Teachers and administrators need to envision progressive, humane, and ethical curriculum and imagine themselves in new identities as powerful and dictated creators of it. Within a clear vision of recultured curriculum, educators thus articulate the framing ideals, standards, and organizing categories, bring together ideas and desires, and catalyze various initiatives to attain their vision. As educators attempt to cross a long terrain, their leadership continuously emerges in response to the challenges they encounter and the struggles they undertake to reconstitute curriculum and renew themselves as practitioners. The outcome, therefore, is that educators will possess the new identities in their characteristic roles and hold a dramatically changed orientation to study, understanding, development, interaction, and regard for one another and their students. The first step toward curriculum leadership is engaging in curriculum inquiry to gain deep understanding of the norms, patterns, structures that obstruct as well as make curriculum transformation possible. Essentially, this means making known familiar discourses, forces, structures, and hierarchies that remain unquestioned. Change in culture of school requires examination and alteration of both thought and action in the context of the school. All the teachers, principal, and other staff members examine what already exists and explore alternative explanations, meanings, and actions. By promoting reflection in action, questioning everything and trying out many ideas in thought and action, culture is less likely to invisibly determine what goes on in school. Naming the structures and the forces must lead to the problem posing to understand the agendas for schools held by outside forces, to transcend a belief that a system of schooling is neutral, and gain a historic sense of the roots of antidemocratic trends in curricular. It is such scrutiny and attention that Maxine Greene encouraged when she implored educators to shake off indifference, a lack of care and absence of concern, and to make sense of what's happening, to be autonomous. It is by becoming wide awake can educators develop a sense of agency required for living a moral life. The practice and habit of inquiry as part of identity of educators as transformative intellectuals. For some educators, this becomes an essential change of self-understanding, moving away from conceiving solely as oneself as a technician, skill developer, or knowledge imparter. If we believe that the role of teaching cannot be reduced to merely training in the practical skills, but involves instead the education of a class of intellectuals vital to the development of a free society, then the category of intellectual becomes a way of linking the purpose of teacher education, public schooling, and in-service training to the very principles necessary for developing democratic order in society. I have argued that by viewing teachers as intellectuals, those persons concerned with education can begin to rethink and reform the traditions and conditions that have prevented schools and teachers from assuming their full potential as active, reflective scholars and practitioners. Others have characterized identities of such education as curriculum workers, who are public moral intellectuals who work within an embryonic democracy, unafraid of stirring controversy, stimulating critical analysis, challenging orthodoxy, pursuing collaboration, and searching for consensus. These identities included both intellect and agency for progressive educational reform. Becoming a curriculum leader itself calls for a significant leap of faith to recast identity and professional orientation, and thus emergent curriculum leadership has its existential side. When educators seek to institute the new meaning systems of recultured curriculum, they must embrace the new identities and orientations, always coming to moments in which personal histories and professional careers are in an existential balance. As such, curricular workers face moments when the risk and unfamiliarity and exhilaration of reaching for the possibilities of profound change, interim steps toward their ultimate vision, hover around the decision to engage lightly, heavily, or not at all in curriculum transformation. Moreover, as curriculum workers acquire a new vision of curriculum and bring themselves to reach for the uncertain, they must continue to develop a practical capacity to enact suitable recultured curriculum in their own classrooms, both to develop expertise and to provide models of transformation. These efforts would necessarily entail at least some significant connections to the world beyond the classroom, drawing upon information and classroom-based resources, people and contacts, collaboration with parents and the community, professional networks and programs, colleagues within the school, support from administrators, and advice from specialists. We cannot underestimate or undervalue teachers having recultured curriculum content and best practices in hand, and this only can come from carefully directed professional learning grounded closely with a plan for changing curriculum. Nor can we underestimate the importance of working strategically and politically to change the larger school content, the infrastructure of the institutional school, as a vehicle towards establishing the larger conditions for a recultured classroom curriculum. In their continually emerging leadership, curriculum workers give themselves over to a steadily deepening commitment to what good education and worthy curriculum would mean in their lives of their students now and in the future. To moral concerns for the lives of their own students, a later and broader focus of this concern for human well-being is turned to the lives of the students more generally, a more ethical, socio-political focus that expands outward from the classroom to more distant school locals. The evolving commitment of emerging teacher leadership for recultured curriculum and schooling provides the fire for engagement that sustains teachers and renews them along the way, allowing for professional careers of integrity rather than cynicism and regret. Curricular cultures. We propose that the concept of curricular cultures can be useful to understanding the process of reculturing and help curriculum workers to change their own practices and curriculum in their schools. We previously defined a culture of curriculum as a coherent set of aims and practices that can be articulated by all stakeholders, including learners, educators, and families. Curriculum cultures should not be perceived as static, but as dynamic or evolving because belief systems are acted upon by historical events, societal change, scholarly discoveries, and transformative moral discourse. We do not suggest that cultures of curriculum we describe are infinite or universal, but rather are rather representatives of curricular orientations present in particular times and places. When a culture of curriculum exists, the learning experience reflects a rationale with intention and purpose. A thoughtful body of beliefs then serves to cohere what would otherwise be a succession of classroom activities with little integrity. In ordinary cultures of classrooms and schools, a distinct and meaningful vision is not required. All classrooms and schools reveal cultures in the sense of having norms, values, beliefs, practices, stories, and power relationships. In contrary, Ordinary classroom and school cultures lack unifying visions that characterize what we call curricular cultures. Once more, a culture of curriculum is different from a real culture in that it makes its beliefs and aims explicit, open to the scrutiny and evaluation. Curricular cultures for inquiry. We believe that using a framework for naming the curricular culture provides a lens for self-scrutiny and for systematic inquiry to change consciousness about the curriculum field and the curriculum manifest in the classrooms. Studying the curriculum in one's classroom and schools allow for questioning. There is a vision or visions that guide the curriculum work. Are there shared beliefs about how children learn and what learners need? And what should the role be of teachers? Such investigation also highlights contradictory beliefs as well as mismatches of visions and practices, such as disparities between school missions and practices, or conversely, practices that support goals. Educators may believe that they hold similar values about what they want students to learn, yet they may hold very different visions, even when supposedly teaching similar curricula. This heuristic also allows educators in the community to scrutinize purposes and practices around the specific curricula. As an illustration, multicultural curriculum represents a cacophony of content, practices, and goals depending upon its enactment within a curricular culture. It prepares students for a workplace that includes colleagues of other ethnic backgrounds and prepares for competition on a global market, or it encourages learning from others' perspectives, appreciation for one's own cultural identity, preservation preservation of cultural traditions, as well as the development of critical perspectives to understand and confront racism. So, to cooperative learning can be identified with several curricular orientations. It has been adopted in some classrooms because it encourages cooperation for the workplace. In other classrooms, because it facilitates the construction of knowledge, and in others, because it fosters democratic decision making or draws out students' voices to create dialogue with others. Another example of this use of technology in the classroom, as it can be a tool for business, provides access to the cultural knowledge, enables self directed learning, facilitate communication with others, and can be a powerful medium for social action. These examples show the need for curriculum inquiry to explore what teachers' purposes and what meanings have students constructed. In this way, the curricular cultures framework permits a deeper understanding of lived curriculum. We also suggest that framework for curriculum cultures can guide individuals and groups when they contemplate their aims and meanings of accomplishing them. We believe that individuals need to name their visions and assumptions, looking for irreconcilable conflicts that would make it impossible for them to do it all, and eventually to characterize the cultures of the curriculum that best describe their beliefs and values. We encourage the reflection of visions and practices to begin in teacher education and to be revisited by individuals throughout their careers. Inquiry and reflection about curriculum work should become habitual. So individuals stay attuned to their moral purposes for becoming teachers by continually asking themselves if they are working to realize their ideals. Further, such inquiry in collaboration with families and communities can be very powerful, especially as impetus for reculturing. We're not suggesting, however, that naming one's culture of curriculum should be the only goal. As chosen curricular culture must be held up to scrutiny. Individuals must recurrently engage in critique, questioning of their visions, assumptions, and practices, reflect naivety or conclusions based on the research and evaluation. Have they, for example, learned from students what curriculum has meaning, or have they questioned their environment of the classroom and the school as well as the instructional practices that support their goals? Scrutiny means the consistent examination and vision of practices and articulation of the relationship between them. Accordingly, all cultures of curriculum need to be revisited periodically to assess their timeliness and vitality. The framework for curricular cultures can be a starting point of dialogue with colleagues and community members for eliciting visions and beliefs as they initiate curriculum changes or develop alternative schools. We can imagine a forum in which people sit in a circle and share their visions for the purposes of education or their beliefs about how students learn best. Or a facilitator could start with the belief or visions asking participants to literally take a stand of support on the opposition along a line, illustrating a continuum drawn on the floor. The discussion would continue so that people would further understand the nature of their beliefs about the curriculum and articulate their values. The participants who focus on short-term goals of instruction would be urged to imagine the political, social, and moral consequences of education. Those who think broadly of education leading to changing or sustaining a particular social vision must be encouraged to deal with pedagogy. Through a more articulated framework, participants could work to understand not only what culture best describes their understanding of curriculum, but how their positions are similar and different from others. Because the curricular cultures are not isolates, participants may discover shared visions, shared social visions, but see different pedagogical meanings for attaining their visions, or they may not agree about instruction, but assume very different social and political ends. We anticipate several possible outcomes of such dialogue. Articulation of beliefs may inspire conversations about pedagogical goals and practices, as well as the political, moral, and social issues. Those of like mind may begin planning how they can create an environment to support their goals. It may be possible, too, that people have not talked to each other before or have assumed that there are substantial differences among them, um, could discover what assumptions and visions they might hold in common, a good starting point for further conversation and collaboration. We imagine that even dissonance would produce insight for people to learn from one another, are challenged and develop clearer and perhaps modified articulations of their beliefs. The danger, of course, is that these conservations may produce disturbing discord in which participants find that they have drastically different goals. Lines may be drawn in which people learn that some of their positions cannot be compromised, and and a community or school will be faced with dilemmas of how to accommodate conflicting visions. But in the long run, vigorous public discourse about meaningful pedagogical, social, and moral issues would challenge the prevailing culture of business as usual, in which beliefs and practices go unexamined. Further, such conversations around the school reform as it also a prime arena for debating the shape of the future of society. Such debate is a broad civil and moral enterprise in which all citizens are stakeholders. Curricular cultures in classroom and schools. We believe that it is a mistake to try to create a hasty amalgam of curricular cultures. If educators try to be all things to all learners, promising a potpourri of outcomes from all classroom cultures, the effort is likely to result in a morass of incongruous educational practices. When content and learning activities are used for multiple but unrelated purposes, they contribute to the ad hoc curriculum that has had little significance to learners or teachers. We see advantages in having the same classroom culture consistently present across the class of learners school day. A culture curriculum would have a great impact on the lives of students if the beliefs and practices were consistently present in a range of school subjects and sustained throughout the educational career of the learner. For students trying to participate functionally on several different cultures in a single school day, there's little continuity across subjects, and over the years of schooling, they cannot clearly envision the goals of learning. Undoubtedly, a school's community devoted to the same vision and working to create and maintain congruent practices would produce far less dissonance for learners and teachers. Additionally, the community members and parents clearly understand the school's educational mission. If this culture continues over a student's school career, its subtle but powerful belief system will exert its distinctive influence. Learners will then come to have a certain expectation of themselves and their teachers and shared understanding of nature of knowledge, schooling, and the community. Only after students experience prolonged engagements for these curricular cultures will they internalize notions of what learning is good so far, who has the authoritative knowledge, and what the relationship should be between the students and teacher. Clearly, many of the same issues about benefits of a single coherent culture in the classroom pertain to the questions about unified school-wide approach to the curriculum. We realize that some practices fundamental to one curricular culture may hardly seem feasible to incorporate into another. For instance, a teacher with a child-centered classroom would not create a critical pedagogy culture unless students chose to shape their education toward social action. Students learning in an indigenous language and a cultural program would not likely to make sense out of the curriculum intended to focus on occupational study linked to academic disciplines, unless such study focuses on the history and the culture of their people. Similarly, a constructivist approach to learning traditional wisdom may result in a group of students who have different constructions of the canon. In any sense, the common body and the knowledge is lost amidst a sea of personal interpretations. Notwithstanding, we have seen how educators create hybrids because they believe that commingling elements of different curricular cultures meet a community's needs. A historical example is New York City's Central Park East High School that developed a thematic curriculum relating to critical inquiry in the core humanities curriculum. It also fostered emergent curriculum stemming from students' interests. In Washington State, the Tulipan Indian Tribal School had developed a curriculum incorporating native language and the Montessori constructivist methods. Currently, educators at the Native American Community Academy in Albuquerque, New Mexico, teach from this hybrid curriculum model based on holistic education emphasizing wellness as knowledge and an indigenous language and culture. In fact, excuse me. In fact, Montessori education exemplifies the hybrid of three curricular orientations described in this book: constructivist, child-centered, and peace education. The above examples prompt questions. When do we integrate two or more curricular cultures? Which elements of one culture can be meaningfully transposed with another? As long as beliefs from the two curricular cultures are neither contradictory or preemptive, it seems reasonable that they are, to a degree, transposable from one culture to another. A good deal of reflection and planning would be necessary to understand which components would be harmony, which would be incompatible, and overall, what would be lost in the attempt of hybridization. Or can we create composites knowing that we will have to work with inherent tension, for example, investigating themselves about power relationships when studying the canon and negotiating a democrat as well as child-centered curriculum? Whether or not it's desirable for a student with experience to experience total immersion in one curricular culture is open to debate. We can conceive that for some scenarios, for several curricular cultural existing within a school, but these would arise from the deliberated side, not because of short-term goals or an ad hocness. For instance, the school's community may be concerned with a singular vision held by all who would generate healthy challenges to beliefs and practices. The school staff could create a laboratory setting by trying out several curricular cultures in different classrooms, creating an intellectual climate of inquiry for research and evaluation. In such a situation, visions and practices would have to be made explicit. Students and teachers would study their experiences of living with several curricular cultures. A school might also create a sequential plan based upon perceived needs of children and adolescents to expose learners developmentally to different cultures for several years at a time. Perhaps a child-centered primary education, a democrative middle school, and a critical culture for high school. Ultimately, an expression of reculturing, no curricular culture can exist where an institutional structure of the school is incongruent with its vision, beliefs, practices, activities, and values. Coherent, articulated curriculum cannot arise without some measure of deliberate change from the current culture of schooling. Thus, curriculum that changes or challenges the status quo obligates its adherents to strive through coalition platforms and policy against the givens of the school as a non-visionary set of short-term goals and institutional practices. The nature of vision. The benefit of creating a curricular culture lies the power of a clear, publicly conscious, and unifying vision that guides the articulation of goals, brings together ideas and desires, and becomes a catalyst for change. In the vision that propels successful curricular change and separates schools with transformative curriculum from schools with the status quo cultures. For instance, researchers depict vision as a core component of school culture as a goal consensus grounded in daily interaction from school participants. Individual classrooms likewise can assume the distinctive culture with vision conveying the overarching general sense of what sets this culture apart. Its participants would hold an associated stock of images of exemplary practices underpinned by defining their beliefs and values. Such goal consensus has a cognitive dimension representing the rationality of articulated aims and consciousness consensus. But vision also creates coherence and has a cathec- cathetic dimension. The school culture becomes invested with emotional and intellectual energy. But having a vision and shared beliefs about a purpose of education certainly is not the whole story. Westheimer writes that many researchers and reformers maintain what is important for transforming schools is beliefs are shared, yet he doubts the analyst of restructuring carry whether the beliefs are the shared what's shared are worth sharing. He asks us to consider what kind of world should we strive for, insisting that we must look at the school cultures and see if marginalized voices are heard, and if they reflect ideals in participatory and egalitarian communities. Similarly, Wood cautions that talk about empowering teachers as curriculum workers needs to be rethought. To empower teachers is not enough. We must ask to what end, to what shared agenda. We also believe that purposes and beliefs do not matter, and the curriculum transformation is not a value-free phenomenon. Another way to think about the value basis of education is to consider Elie Wiesel's comments about the education of the Holocaust perpetrators that apparently omitted consideration of understanding of human beings and the study of nature and caring about living beings and cooperation among human beings. There are many paths possible for reculturing of curriculum, such as helping students see themselves as intellectual change makers. The participants in Democratic Society, Parker 2005, and an activist who knows how to resist the environmental degradation and violence to cultures. The visions of students parallel that we must be a crucial aim of reculturing to foster classroom and school cultures in which overarching ethical questions are asked and their answers pondered. At its core, the morality concerns and the questions, how should we live? To educate human being is not merely to make one knowledgeable, productive members of society, transmission, or an active, engaged citizen transaction, but also to help the person discover a deeper meaning of his or her life. Who are we? Why are we on this earth? What is our relationship to other living beings and to the evolution of the cosmos itself? Education should be practiced in such a way to encourage young people to pursue this understanding. Essentially, it starts with teaching a reference for life. Reverence for life of life. Consequently, how do we educate children to become ethical and caring human beings? Reculturing curriculum means to create environments for helping students to develop human beings and not just as workers, test takers, and technicians. All conceptualizations of reculturing involvement, meaning making so that the children and adolescents make sense of their world, respect all of life, and develop their moral selves. The view of a child has the right to an education will develop a sense of moral and social responsibility that is long-standing principle articulated by Dewey at the end of the 19th century, proclaimed in the United Nations Declaration of Rights of the Child. Under such understanding of curriculum may be transformative, but is hardly revolutionary. As follows, it is crucial to name the ethical vision for the curriculum, to use it as a guide, as a beacon for new attainments, vision and far-reaching in nature, emanating from the heart of the culture and giving significance to everything that it encompasses. A vision shared with passion by all participants, taking shape in the central place, being forged by a myriad of efforts for a long period of time. Finally, vision forces us to scrutinize the culture of curriculum, the culture of the school and the classroom that we create, continually moving us to the work toward their actualization, constantly reminding us to compare the real to the ideal. And that is the end of chapter 4. Dun, 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 dun.